Hi guys, it's Just from Honest Fiction and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about everything I read in February. Alright guys, so I ended up reading over 20 books in February, which is absolutely crazy. This is the most books I've ever read in 1 month. I am so jazzed about it. I asked you guys on Instagram if you wanted me to break this up into 2 parts or just do one really long video. The majority of you wanted one really long video, so that's what we're gonna do. So all of the books I read were either fantasy romance, dark romance, or contemporary romance. It's February, it's the month of love, so I really went all in on the romance. Now, if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Thursday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram and Goodreads accounts, both linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's talk about the books I read in February. Alright guys, so I'm going to sort this wrap up by genre, so we're going to start off with fantasy romance. Now, this first book was a new release, everyone's talking about it, and that is House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J. Maas, the second book in the Crescent City series. So I have a full spoiler review I'll leave in the cards in the description if you want to go check that out. I can't say very much about this just because I don't want to give away spoilers, but this book pretty much starts off right where the last book ended, and oh my gosh, it was a wild ride. I will say this book has a lot of information given to you. If you've read Crescent City, you know the beginning of Crescent City is very info dumpy. There's just so much going on with the world building. This book expands on that, and there's even more world building, so I honestly suggest you should probably take notes while you're reading this. However, the ending was just superb. So I highly recommend, if you're a fan of Sarah J. Maas, definitely pick this book up. Next up for fantasy romance was actually a reread, and we have The Crown of Gilded Bones by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is the third book in the From Blood and Ash series. So the fourth book, The War of Two Queens, is going to be released in March, and I'm so excited. I just filmed, if you notice my outfit's going to be exactly the same, a recap video for A Crown of Gilded Bones. If you guys want to watch that instead of going back and rereading the entire book, definitely check that out. But I am so excited for The War of Two Queens. In my reread of this, I found out a lot more. I feel like it's been so long since I read this. There are a lot of little details. And also, if you haven't yet, I would suggest reading A Shadow in the Ember. So this was my first time rereading A Crown of Gilded Bones after I read A Shadow in the Ember, and it's an experience. So highly suggest, if you haven't done that yet, please do that before The War of the Two Queens comes out. I will be vlogging reading The War of Two Queens, and I also have a predictions and theories video for The War of Two Queens that should be dropping next week, so look forward to that. But yeah, I just love this series so much. It is one of my favorite fantasy romance, and I highly, highly recommend. Alright, next up for fantasy romance, we have Black Sunshine, and this is by Halle. So I've already sung this book's praises in a few other videos, but this is like dark, spicy, angsty Twilight. So this is following Lenore, who, unbeknownst to her, was raised by these witches. And on her 21st birthday, she is kidnapped by a vampire, and that vampire kind of helps her figure out her true power and who she really is. And it's so good. I have not read the sequel yet. Apparently it's a duet. I listened to this first one via audio. Highly recommend doing that. I think the audio narrator did a phenomenal job. Unfortunately, the second book they don't have available yet for audio, so I have to read it physically. But I loved these characters. The love interest in this is just so, so good. And I just really, really enjoyed it. I couldn't believe I hadn't heard of this before. This has apparently been out for a while, and it like checks all my boxes of things I want in fantasy romance. But highly, highly suggest, if you enjoy vampire romance, pick this up. And next up we have a book that I didn't really love, but it was still pretty good. And that is The Savage and the Swan, and this is by Ella Fields. So this book kind of had a little bit of everything. We had Rumpelstiltskin, the Swan Princess, Beauty and the Beast, and it's following this girl who's a fairy princess, or a fae princess, and she's about to marry a human prince in order for both of them to protect each other, or to pretty much form an alliance against the Unseelie Court. So the Unseelie Court is being ruled by this horrible dark being that can change into a wolf, and they're just absolutely terrible. So then one day when the Fae Princess just runs away and is kind of analyzing her life and the predicament she's in, she meets someone from the Unseelie Court, and he trains her how to fight, and it kind of goes from there. So while I did very much enjoy this, I will say there were a lot of elements that are brought up. So as far as like Rumpelstiltskin, we see that in the beginning. It's mentioned a little bit in the middle, and then that plot completely drops. So I feel like this book really would have benefited from either being a series or being a little bit longer. Also, Warning, I listened to this via audio, not realizing that it was dual POV. So the female narrator did an amazing job. I could not listen to the male narrator. Something about his voice was just so grating. So I ended up switching to reading this physically. Just know that going in that they don't let you sample the male narrator's voice, and it's rough. But anyway, I would still give this a shot. This isn't one of my favorite fantasy romance, but once again, it had elements that I did really enjoy. All right, so this next book, unfortunately, I was not a fan of. However, a lot of people absolutely love this series, and that is City of Thorns by C.N. Crawford. So I actually buddy read this with Issa and from Fun Fantasy Books, and had I not been buddy reading it, I probably would have DNF'd it. I just was not a huge fan. So this is an urban fantasy following our main character, whose mother was killed by a demon. So she has grown up wanting to get into this demon area that's very, very hard to get into. Lucky for her, one day a demon named Orion comes to the human lands and mistakes our main character for a succubus. So Orion and our main character decide they're going to work together in order to infiltrate like the demon area and infiltrate like the kingdom of the demons. So some things I liked about this is the main character does reference psychology a lot. So I was actually a psychology major undergrad. That's what my undergraduate degree's in. So I really thought that was cool, where she's like thinking back to classes while she's trying to like outsmart these demons. The only thing about this book, first of all, it's urban fantasy. I'm not a huge urban fantasy fan. The only urban fantasy I've really enjoyed was Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood, and House of Sky and Breath. I really like the high fantasy vibe for fantasy romance. I don't know, I just think it's more whimsical and magical, so I'm not a huge urban fantasy fan. I also didn't love the writing. I feel like there was a lot of unnecessary language, and like I'm not against like cursing or anything. It just felt redundant and it didn't need to be there. And also the writing, as far as I wanted to see more things. This book is pretty short, and I feel like there were certain parts of the book that could have been expanded upon. So at one point our main character has to outwit all of these demons without having any powers, and we only get to see a little snip of her doing that. I wish we had more. So I will not be continuing with the series unless you guys think it gets way better. And if you've read the series and really enjoyed it, let me know down in the comments below. But overall, I just wasn't a huge fan. And last up for fantasy romance, this book is kind of on the cusp of like fantasy romance and dark romance, and that is Electric Idol by the Queen Katee Roberts. So this is the second book after Neon Gods. Neon Gods was a Hades and Persephone retelling, and it was chef's kiss. I loved it. It had like a BDSM subplot, and it was so good. The only thing I didn't love about Neon Gods was the world building, and that is continued with this. So Electric Idols is following Eros and Psyche. Eros is the son of Aphrodite and kind of like Aphrodite's hitman, and then Psyche ends up angering Aphrodite, and Eros and Psyche end up doing a marriage of convenience and do the whole fake dating, and it was cute. I liked it. I did read this book in a day, so I did enjoy it. However, I just didn't love Eros and Psyche as much as I loved Hades and Persephone. Their relationship was everything, and Eros and Psyche was just, it was okay. It was kind of like instant chemistry, and I liked Psyche a lot as a character. She's an influencer, and she's plus side and proud, and like I loved her, but overall the relationship, I didn't love. And then also the world building, I just had so much trouble understanding how this world works. I understand that the gods aren't actually gods. They just have like the title of gods. And I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of the whole world building in this entire series. But overall, still a decent read, and I would still definitely check it out. All right, so moving into dark romance. First up is a series that was absolutely addicting. I could not put it down. I read all 3 books in 2 days. And it's the All the Pretty Things series by Monica James. So it starts with Bad Saint, which is the first book, followed by Fallen Saint, and then ending with Forever My Saint. And this story was just so gripping and oh, so good. So it's following our main character, Willow, who ends up being kidnapped on her honeymoon. And after being kidnapped, she finds out that she was actually won in a poker game, and the people that kidnapped her are going to take her to this mob boss, and she's going to be like his pet. So obviously, she does not want this to happen, and when she takes the opportunity to become free, she ends up shipwrecking the ship she's on, and then she's stuck on an island with her captor, and the series goes from there. Oh my goodness, I loved this series so much. So a lot of you have asked me for a book similar to the Flock series. Now, there are so many differences between the series and the Ravenhood series. However, it definitely has a similar thriller, suspense, romance vibe, and I highly recommend, if you really enjoyed the Flock Ravenhood series, then to check the series out, because it's so good. And Saint, oh, love him. So anyway, highly recommend. Please pick up the series. It is just absolutely amazing. All right, so this next dark romance, I'm not really sure how to rate. I believe on Goodreads I put it at a 3.5. However, the longer it's been since I've read it, I just find myself thinking about it all the time. And that is Darling Venom, and this is by Parker S. Huntington. So I actually listened to this via audio, highly recommend, narrator is great. But this is following our main character that is dealing with a lot of stuff when she is younger, about to start high school, and she plans on doing self-harm, and then she meets a friend and they kind of bond. Then something tragic happens, and then when she grows up, she ends up meeting her friend's brother, and they start to form a relationship. And it's very interesting to see how our main character grew from the child she was to where she is now, and it's just a very intense journey. This is very dark. Definitely, it's dark in not the sense that I thought it was going to be, if that makes any sense. This is dark in the fact that it's dealing with these very raw emotions and these very traumatic events, and we kind of put ourselves in the shoes of these characters, and it's very sad. So I was very upset while reading most of this. I think I didn't expect it to be as emotional as it was, but I would definitely check this out. I think, thinking back on it, I would probably give this more 4 stars, not 3.5. But yeah, if it's something you're interested in, definitely check trigger warnings, but I highly recommend it. And moving on, I read The Heir by Sophie Lark, which is the first in the Kingmaker series. So I read the Brutal Birthright series, which is about all of these different mafia families and relationships. So the Kingmaker series is actually about the children of those mafia families. You don't have to read the Brutal Birthright series first, however, I highly suggest you do. There are just some really fun Easter eggs, and it's nice to reference the parents to the children. It's just really fun. So we're following our main character. I believe his name is Leo. I did read this in the very beginning of February, and he gets a letter that he's going to go to Kingmakers. And Kingmakers is this college that all of the mafia families send their children to in order to learn how to be like great mafia bosses, but they also have immunity where like they can't kill each other. So he ends up going with his cousin by marriage, who he's very, very close with, and it's really their journey through Kingmakers. And I loved it. I love Sophie Lark's writing. Her spicy scenes are just amazing, but also her characters are just, you love them. So I highly recommend, if you're a fan of Sophie Lark, definitely check out The Heir. And next up, we have another 5-star read. So Dark Notes by Pam Godwin was absolutely amazing. So this is following Ivory, and she is a girl living in New Orleans, and she is an amazing pianist and is actually going to this high school for music, and she's just very gifted. Unfortunately, her family is just the worst, and she is doing whatever she can to keep her family afloat, even though they don't really appreciate her. She's also picked on in school because she's going to this very well-known high school, and she's the poor girl. So we're dealing with that. Then we also have Emmerich, who is a new teacher starting at this high school, and he was kicked out of his old school for some illicit behavior. And they end up forming a relationship, and oh my goodness, is it awesome. It's just so perfect. So if you are definitely check trigger warnings, first of all the books going forward for dark romance, I would say check trigger warnings. But this does, once again, have kind of like a BDSM element, but I am not a fan at all of the student-teacher trope. I always find it so disgusting, and it worked in this. I don't know how it worked. Pam Godwin is just amazing. She made me, in Sea of Ruin, if you've read Sea of Ruin by Pam Godwin, which is also an amazing read, she is able to turn these tropes that I typically am not a fan of, they're very taboo, and just makes them work. And she really made it work with this book. I loved it. I loved Ivory and Emmerich together. I loved how bossy Emmerich was, and it was so good. So if you are a fan of Pam Godwin, even if you're not, please check this book out. I don't hear a lot of people talking about it, and I just really, really enjoyed it. All right, the next few books I'm about to talk about are all in my spiciest books I've ever read video that I'll leave in the cards in the description. I probably go a little bit more in depth in that video than I'm about to go now. First up, we have Haunting Adeline. And this is by H.D. Carlton. So there's a lot of controversy going on regarding this book. I think if you know what it is and you just know, you read the trigger warnings and you know what you're going to get going into it, it's fine. I actually really enjoyed this. It's following this girl that moves into her grandmother's like dilapidated rundown house after her grandmother passes away. And when she gets there, she is trying to solve a murder that took place in the past, but she's also being stalked. So it's dual POV. We're also in the mind of the stalker, who is actually like this vigilante who goes around unaliving people that do these terrible, like nefarious things. So like he's good, but he's also stalking our main character, so that's not great. But overall, I loved, the stalker's name is Zaid. I love Zaid. He was awesome. He was so good. I like him a little bit more in Hunting Adeline, which is the sequel I'm about to talk about. But this was fun. I think if you are a fan of dark romance, you're okay with the themes that go involved with dark romance. Also, there's an author's note in this that kind of tells you everything that's about to happen in the book. So as long as you're okay with all of that, I think you would enjoy this, and I would definitely give this book a shot. All right, and then right after I finished reading Haunting Adeline, I read Hunting Adeline. So Hunting Adeline is definitely much darker than Haunting Adeline. It takes place right where Hunting Adeline left off. And honestly, I think it was a little too dark for me. I don't really know how to explain what happens, first without giving away spoilers for Haunting Adeline, but also without getting demonetized. It's just dealing with a lot of very dark themes, and it just felt more gritty, if that makes sense. And I wasn't a huge fan of Hunting Adeline. Haunting Adeline, I actually bought a physical copy after reading it on my Kindle, and I really enjoyed it. Hunting Adeline was just a little too dark for me, but I think it would be pretty good for most people that really like dark romance. I'm still fairly new to dark romance, so I don't know. I'm sure if you are like a seasoned veteran and you like dark romance, you'll love it. But either way, I think the Duet is worth checking out. Just check the trigger warnings. And next up, I read a very spicy novella, and that is Games We Play, and this is by Dana Islay. So this is following two people. So the first one is a reporter who ends up going to the house of this gamer, and this gamer is actually a very well-known streamer who has a very alluring voice, and he makes money by one streaming, but also by having people have him say certain spicy phrases. So when this reporter goes to interview him, he ends up asking her to spend the night, and this novella is just following their night together. Now, first off, listen to it on audio. Just do yourself a favor, the audiobook. I don't know who this guy is, but his voice is just perfection. So good. But this is, once again, very spicy. I will say, though, I was very impressed by the amount of character development we get from our two characters. We get full backstories, and, like, it's a very short book, so I was not expecting that, and I really did enjoy it. Enough to read the other novellas in the series, which I'm going to talk about. But I really, really liked this. There is, like, derogatory and degrading language, and then also praise, and then BDSM stuff. Check trigger warnings. But overall, really, really good. Highly recommend. Very spicy. And then I read Secrets We Hunt, which is another novella in that series. And also, really, really good. We're following another character that we actually met in Games We Play, and he's at our main characters from the Games We Play's wedding. And when he gets to the wedding, which is on a boat, he sees that one of the bridesmaids is actually his estranged, very good friend. And it kind of has like a hunter-prey vibe in the beginning, but then we soon learn that his best friend is not to be messed with. It was very enjoyable. I think I liked Games We Play a little bit better. However, if you enjoyed Games We Play, 100% pick up the next book in the series. I plan on continuing with the series. I haven't read the third book yet, dipped in Halle, but I do plan to. So once again, definitely check it out. And then next up with Dark Romance was actually a DNF. I forgot I DNF'd this month, and that was Priest, and I just hated this. I just could not get into it, probably because I'm thinking of my like Catholic grandmother yelling at me from heaven. It's following this priest who ends up being in confessional with a troubled girl, and then they kind of form a relationship. But he also is thinking in his head that he shouldn't be doing this because of his vows, and it's a no for me. It didn't work. I didn't love the writing, and I couldn't get into it. So unfortunately, I did DNF this. I will link some people that have finished it, their reviews down below. So if you're interested, you can see, but it just was not a book for me. And last up for Dark Romance, we have Sicko by Amo Jones. I can't even begin to try to describe what goes on in this book. It is just a wild, chaotic, but amazing ride. This was actually recommended to me by someone who has very similar reading taste to me, so thank you for that. But this book is following, it starts off with a brother and sister, a foster brother and sister, and right away you know that they have this very close bond, and they might have more feelings than sibling relationship. Once again, they're not blood related, so it's not incest or anything. But then when the girl ends up being, I think she's 15, the brother just disappears. So she grows up, she goes to college, and then the brother comes back into her life, and he's part of a motorcycle gang. There are so many twists and turns in this book. You will have no idea what is going on, but in the best way. If you are a fan of dark romance, please read this. And moving into contemporary romance, so first up I read Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren. This was recommended to me by one of you guys, so thank you so much for that. I absolutely loved it. It's following our main character Macy, and it's actually alternate timelines. So in her past, her mother passed away when she was young, and her mother left a list of things for her father to do as a single parent, and one of them was to get a weekend home. So when Macy is younger, they get this weekend home, and she becomes very, very close with the neighbor in that house, and they just have such a cute and adorable relationship, and it slowly blossoms into a little bit more. So then we're in the current present timeline, and our main character Macy ends up running into that neighbor, and for some reason they have been estranged, and we're following their story. I was crying. So this was so good, but also so sad. I have to read more books by Christina Lauren. I read, I think In the Holidays was by her, but if there are any other Christina Lauren books that you guys really enjoy, let me know down in the comments below so I can pick them up, because this book was so good. And next up, I read November 9th by Colleen Hoover. You guys told me this is one of your favorite Colleen Hoover books. I understand why. This book was emotional and gripping, and I loved Ben and Fallon's relationship. So this is following our main character, Fallon, who was scarred in a terrible fire when she was a child. And then one day when she is meeting with her father, she's about to make a long distance move from LA to New York, and she sees this guy. He ends up kind of sticking up for her in front of her father, and they just have instant chemistry and hit it off. However, Fallon really doesn't want to settle down. She wants to live her life. Her mother always told her not to settle down too young. So Fallon and Ben agree that they are going to meet with each other every year on November 9th, but they're not going to call each other. They're not going to interact on social media. It's just going to be this standing date that on November 9th, every year for 5 years, they're going to meet. And it's their story. I loved this. I heard the premise of it, and I was like, I'm not really sure if this is going to be for me. I think one of the synopsis I read was talking about how Ben finds Fallon as his muse. It's so much deeper than that. Ben is a writer, and he is writing a book about meeting with Fallon every year on November 9th, but this book was so good. The only critique I have is the twist ending, or the ending was not necessary. It honestly kind of took away from the book a little bit. It seemed a little ridiculous, but overall, highly recommend. If you have not read this yet, pick it up. And next up, I have another 5-star read. February was just a really good reading month for me, and that is All Roads Lead Here by Mariana Zapata. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Someone said in the comments that I said it wrong. I've looked up other videos. That's how I see it pronounced. But either way, I love this book. It was so good. So it is following our main character, Aurora, and in the very beginning of the book, she ends up being dumped by her husband of over 15 years. So she decides to move back home to where she grew up. Now, we find out that her mother actually went missing while hiking a trail, because where she grew up, I believe it's Arizona, is just filled with all of these gorgeous trails that people like to hike. So Aurora decides that she is going to rent an apartment and then try to hike all of the trails that her mother loved. Now, when she gets to the apartment, she meets Rhodes, who had no idea that his son listed the apartment for sale or for rent. So they immediately don't really get along, but then slowly a relationship grows, and it's just so good. I will say, this is the slowest burn book I've ever read. The main two characters, the main character Aurora and the love interest Rhodes, do not interact until at least 50% of the way in to this book. However, once they do, it's just amazing. I really enjoyed it. I think that I was okay with the slow burn just because we got to find out so much more about Aurora and everything she's gone through, that it made her relationship with Rhodes just so much more than I feel like a very short book would have done, or a faster paced book would have done. So I was okay with the slow burn. I have picked up Katee and From Luke Off with Love by Mariana Zapata. A lot of people, I think I did an Instagram post and you guys voted that I read Katee first. So I think I will be reading that in March. But either way, I love this book. Definitely one of my favorite contemporary romances of all time. And last up, we have Well Matched by Jen DeLuca. This is part of the Well Met Renaissance series, starting with Well Met, then Well Played, and then now Well Matched. So this is following April, who is a single mother. She is about to become an empty nester because her daughter is going off to college. And although she has lived in the same place for a very long time, she really doesn't have a sense of community. She's really just focused on being a mom, and she wants to eventually move out of this area and just live her life because she had her child very young. So one day when she goes to a bar, she ends up meeting up with Mitch, who is one of my favorite characters from Well Met, and they decide to, or Mitch asks her to do a whole fake dating. He's about to go to a family reunion, and he wants his family to think that he's settled down, and she is mature, she's a little bit older than him, and she seems to have her life together, so he thinks she'll make a good impression with his family. So obviously, when they go to this reunion, things start happening, they start to form this relationship, and it goes from there. The one thing I hated about this book is the miscommunication. I wanted to shake April for 90% of this book. I just feel like I didn't understand how she was interpreting Mitch's actions and like drawing the conclusions that she did. I really dislike the miscommunication trope, and I feel like a lot of these fluffier contemporary romances really lean on it towards the end of the book, and I just hate it. But that was my only critique. Overall, well met, well played, and well matched is probably one of my favorite adult contemporary like fluffy series. So if you have not read it yet, definitely check it out. Alright guys, those are all the books I read in February. Please let me know down in the comments below if you have read any of these books, which one's your favorite, which ones didn't you like. I said this already, but I post new videos every Thursday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week.